Hello, and welcome to the Movie Universe. I'm your host, Movie Fan. I will be talking about The Bob Newhart Show. The show was pretty much about a psychiatrist named Robert Hartley, or Bob Hartley, if you will. As a psychiatrist, he does his best to help his patients. Meanwhile, he's always having a little trouble here and there with his friends and his wife, Emily. What can I say? Even shrinks have troubles at home. It's actually a pretty interesting show to watch because you never really know what kind of trouble is going to be looming on the horizon. Most of the problems seem to occur at his office because his patients, oh my God, the shenanigans they get into is nothing short of unbelievable. For instance, one of his patients tried to jump out the window and he was pretty much stuck on a ledge. And meanwhile, Bob was going to go to a costume party and there he is trying to talk him down dressed as Zorro. Oh, man. And there was one episode where one of his patients got steamed at him, and he hires what you might call an assassin to hit him in the face with a cream pie. And every time he tries to get him, somebody else opens the door and gets hit in the face with the pie. Pretty much through that whole episode, he never got hit. I don't know how he ever came up with stuff like this, but it was brilliant. Now, that's merely a sample of some of the things that can happen, because you never really can tell what Bob Newhart's going to do with his comedy. If you're familiar with his comedy, you would know that he took a more subtle approach. That was his style, because with most comedians, they just try to hit you in the face with the comedy to get a quick laugh out of you. But not Bob. He took a more subtle approach. Sometimes it started off as like a little story that led into something, and then out of nowhere, he hits you with the joke. He would even use misdirection as part of his comedy. Now, what I mean by that is, you know how magicians, they keep your attention focused on one thing, so you think you know what the trick's going to be, and then out of nowhere, something else happens? That's what misdirection is. And that's what Bob would do at times. He would keep your attention focused on one thing, and you think that something's going to happen, but then out of nowhere, something completely unexpected ends up happening, and it makes you laugh even harder. And that's really all I could say about the show because, as I've often said before, when it comes to comedy, you really have to watch it in order to understand what I'm talking about. Because comedy is not something you can duplicate, and it's not something you can just describe either. It's something that you have to sit down and watch in order to see what it's all about. However, I can tell you about the cast members. First off, we got Bob Newhart himself. As I said before, he's a really funny guy, but it's always his unexpected methods and his subtle approach that really makes it hilarious. Next up, we have his wife Emily, played by the beautiful Suzanne Planchette. Now, she doesn't really lend too much comedy to this show. If anything, she plays more like the straight character in a comedy duo team. That, and she's mostly eye candy. And I'm sure some people would recognize her because she was in quite a few films. Their crazy lonely neighbor, Howard, is played by legendary TV star Bill Daly. This guy was everywhere. He was in almost every TV show back in the day, from I Dream of Jeannie to Alf. He's a good character, a lot of laughs, kind of annoying because he's always barging in the place and always kind of mooching off them whenever they're making dinner. But it doesn't take long for you to realize that he's really just a very lonely guy. He pretty much has no friends and no one to talk to. There is one more major character I should mention, and that would be Carol Kester, who's played by Marcia Wallace. She's the secretary of the building that Bob works at, and she's somewhat lazy, always kind of in the middle of something, and she gets herself into some pretty interesting situations that's really hilarious, and she is really good with the snappy comebacks. So she does lend a lot to the show, and I'm sure a lot of fans will recognize her name because she was the voice to Edna Krabappel from the hit series The Simpsons. Those are pretty much the main characters of the show that I think are worth mentioning because the rest of them, they didn't amount to much, so there's really nothing to talk about. However, there were quite a few times they had a few recurring characters on the show. One of them would be one of Bob's patients. This guy was a real timid character, always afraid to stand up to people, afraid to stand up to his wife and all that stuff. If that sounds a little familiar, then you're going to love this, because the actor who played him was legendary voice actor John Fiedler. You would know him best as Piglet. A great show, definitely worth watching. In fact, it was so great, it went for 6 years. From 1972 all the way to 1978. If you've never seen this show, you might want to look it up. It's really good because it has a lot of great laughs and there's even some good drama within. You can find the show on DVD, so if you ever get the chance, look it up. Believe me, you're going to be cracking up through the whole series. This is Movie Fan signing off.